if it weren't for that deliberate planting of evidence, do you think he might have been found guilty?
I do. I think that if the prosecution had played straight, if the police had played straight, there was substantial evidence against them.
Well, OJ Simpson, or known as the Juice, died yesterday of prostate cancer. The news was announced by his family today. He was 76 years old and he's on the front page of nearly all tomorrow's newspapers. Speculation is still rife over, rife over his guilt. Most people think he was guilty. But did he get a fair trial? Did the police try and frame him? So they were some of the things I discussed with Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor, who was part of the famous dream team of lawyers. I asked him what he thought when he heard that OJ Simpson had passed away.
He was tried and he was acquitted in the criminal case and he was found liable in the civil case. The legal process played itself out. The reason he was acquitted in the criminal case is because the police planted a piece of evidence against him. They were convinced he was guilty and that he might get away with it because he was represented by the so-called dream team. So they poured evidence. A man named Officer Van Adder poured blood on a sock that they found next to O.J. Simpson's bed, creating a piece of incriminating evidence against him. But the blood had a chemical in it called EDTA, which is not found in the human body. It's put in test tubes in order to prevent coagulation. And the police officer didn't know that he'd be caught by pouring the blood on the sock. The splatter evidence on the sock also proved that it was placed on the sock, the blood was, when it was lying flat rather than was being worn. So the jury concluded that at least one piece of evidence had been fabricated, and that led them to reasonable doubt about the rest of the evidence.
So if it weren't for that deliberate planting of evidence, do you think he might have been found guilty?
I do. I think that if the prosecution had played straight, if the police had played straight, there was substantial evidence against them. I mean, I was in the courtroom right next to the jury when O.J. Simpson tried on the glove and it didn't fit. That was a major piece of evidence, but it was explainable. He was wearing a latex glove underneath. The glove had been put in a refrigerator and may have shrunk. But there was no escaping the scientific evidence that the sock had been framed and planted against him. And the police probably honestly thought they were doing justice by helping to convict a guilty person by enhancing the evidence, but it backfired.
When you saw him, like millions of other people, being driven by his friend in a Ford Bronco on that day in June 1994, you've been quoted as saying you thought he was guilty. At what point did you think maybe he's not?
Well, I didn't know. I mean, like every American, everybody in the world, I saw him driving around with a gun at his head. And also I knew he had a record of beating his wife. And so I was on television saying he was probably the guy who did it. Most likely the former spouse is almost always the prime suspect. And then when I started looking at the evidence and particularly the sock, I didn't come away with any firm conclusions about guilt or innocence. I came away with a firm conclusion about due process and about the impropriety of framing people even if they're guilty.
And what did you think as time went by when you saw how he continued to live his life? A free man, to what degree do you think he was haunted by the knowledge, and I'm putting this to you, of his guilt?
I don't know. I mean, he foolishly wrote a book saying, if I did it, and when it was published, the if was small and I did it was big in order to sell books. That was a really foolish thing. I can't get into the psyche of the man. I can only look at the evidence, and as a lawyer, as an outsider, and if I were on the jury, I would have voted to acquit based on the fact that I would have believed that the police planted false evidence against him.
And when he was sentenced to 33 years imprisonment on charges of armed robbery and did serve a good 9 years, was that payback? Was that the system saying, okay, we didn't get you for that, but we're going to get you for this because justice demands it?
Undoubtedly, it was payback. The case was one that never would have been brought generally. He was trying to retrieve his own stolen memorabilia, and his evidence was pretty convincing that he was not aware that people would be using guns or violence. And normally in a case like this, if there is a conviction, it'd be a 1 or 2 year sentence. So the long sentence did reflect payback. And, many Americans felt that he deserved payback because they honestly believed that he had done it. Look, if the Goldmans had called me first and asked me to represent them, I probably would have done it. Lawyers represent people who need to be represented, and they don't necessarily take a position on guilt or innocence of their clients. The same thing is true with me. I represented Donald Trump, and people hated me for that. Although I voted against him, I felt his impeachment was unconstitutional. And so, lawyers, defense lawyers, are often very misunderstood, and they're not on the side of the morality or the politics of the people they represent. They're like doctors. They have to cure an illness and defend a client. That's what the Constitution requires.
Even if deep down you think this guy did it, this guy's guilty.
You have to defend people, even if you only defended people who are innocent. The vast majority of people who are charged in countries like the United States and Great Britain are guilty. Thank God for that. Would you want to live in a country where the majority of people charged were innocent? That's Iran. That's Russia. That's China. Maybe that's Cuba. It's not Great Britain. It's not the United States. So the job of the criminal defense attorney is to defend people whether you think they're guilty or innocent, and to put the government to their proof.
And talking about the law and the justice system, Alan, in, I think it was 1997, you wrote your first book about this case, and you were looking at the social forces that drove it, the media and celebrity and money, race and gender. How would you contrast your conclusions now, where America is now, with what you thought back then, some 27 years ago?
It's much worse. It's much worse. We're so divided today, politically along partisan lines. We're divided racially. We're divided ideologically. Look at what's going on the streets today about Israel and Gaza. We are a deeply, deeply divided country. People aren't talking to each other, and it's getting worse. And there's no obvious solution. Social media divides people along ideological lines. So we have to deal with our divisions.
The question is, how do you deal with your divisions? Things are only going to get worse between now and November, aren't they? And what do you think? How concerned are you for the health, the social health, indeed the mental health, perhaps, of your country, of your fellow men and women?
I'm not only concerned about the health of my country, I'm concerned about the health of your country and of Western democracies in general. Maybe the United States is the worst in terms of division, but when I travel in Europe, I see tremendous division in countries all over Europe, in Poland, and Austria, and in Italy, and Great Britain. And so we live in a divided world, and the social media doesn't bring us together; it drives us apart.
Where do you think we're going?
I think we're getting worse and worse, and we need great leaders. And I'm not sure that great leaders today want to run for office the way they're treated. And, I mean, look at the election in the United States. Very few people really want to vote for either of the candidates. They will probably end up voting against one of the candidates rather than for the candidate. And I suspect the same thing is true in many parts of the world today.
And when you look at celebrity and wealth and the way they're coveted in the United States, do you think people getting any better at separating the wheat from the chaff, of understanding that money should not be their God and celebrity should not be their God?
No, I think, again, they say a pessimist is somebody who says things are so bad they can't get worse, and an optimist says, yes, they can. So I do think things can get worse. I'm not suggesting we're in 1930s Europe, France, Germany, Austria. I'm not suggesting we're there, but I am suggesting we're a lot worse than we were some years ago. There was a period of time when the world was much, much more united. Today we're divided about everything, even things as obvious as climate control. We're divided over, and we're not moving in the right direction. And I think it's largely the fault of social media and the fault of lack of great leaders. So we're heading in a dangerous direction. And the OJ Simpson showed that this division was there 30 years ago, but current events show that it's only gotten worse.
Alan Dershowitz, part of OJ Simpson's famous dream team of lawyers. John has sent in a text. Hi, John. He said, I didn't know the police had fabricated evidence against OJ. Totally changes my view. He should have got off, given that. John, thank you very much indeed. Anyone else change their view? Because most people think that OJ Simpson did it. Even those who were supporting him at the time, deep down, a lot of them thought, well, he did it, but I want him to get off for political reasons. Because our people never get off. We can never get a fair trial. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. Because, that was news to you, John, and news to a lot of people, I suspect,